You think you are communicating. You believe every sentence you offer is closing a gap, building a connection, defending your position. You are entirely wrong. Every time you fill a silence, you are not speaking, you are confessing, and the person across from you is not listening. They are collecting. This is not communication, it is exposure. It is the oldest extraction protocol in the architecture of human power, and you have been running it against yourself every day since you were a child, raising your hand for permission to speak. Society tells you that silence is rude. They tell you that an awkward pause must be filled, that a quiet pause is a failure of social grace, that the responsible adult fills the air with explanation, with clarification, with reassurance. They have been training you in this since the first day a teacher asked the class a question and you watched the silence become unbearable. It is a lie, not an innocent misunderstanding. It is a deliberate behavioral protocol designed to keep you legible, predictable, and easy to manage. The person who fills silence is the person who can be read. The person who is read is the person who is owned. Machiavelli understood this 5 centuries ago. He saw that the man who explains is the man who begs, that the man who narrates his moves is the man who hands his enemies the map. The prince does not justify, the prince acts and lets silence do the rest of the work. Across the prince and the discourses, the same posture repeats. Concealment of intent is sovereignty, and the public stream of explanation is the language of those who have already lost. This is not communication, it is exposure. And once you see the invisible mechanism by which every word you speak is being weighed, mapped, and filed against you, you can never sit through a conversation the same way again. The veil is about to be lifted off something most people will spend their entire lives feeding without ever knowing they were the food. There are 4 mechanisms that govern the dark architecture of weaponized silence. By the end of what follows, you will hold the exact protocol that separates the person being interrogated from the person doing the interrogating. But pay close attention to the 3rd mechanism. It is the technique professional interrogators use to extract confessions from men who were trained before deployment to resist torture. Once you understand it, you will recognize it operating in every conversation you have ever lost, in every relationship that left you feeling drained, in every encounter where the other person walked away with everything and you walked away with the strange sensation of having given something you could not name. If you are tired of being the one who explains, who fills, who narrates yourself into a corner, what follows is the architecture of total conversational dominance, the conversational vacuum. Every silence in a conversation is a pressure system. The longer it holds, the more the listener's brain demands resolution. John Sweller called the underlying mechanism cognitive load. The unfilled silence forces the other person's mind into accelerating computation, and the discomfort of that computation drives them to fill the void with whatever information happens to sit closest to the surface. Floyd Allport, working a half-century earlier, gave a related observation a different name. He called it pluralistic ignorance, the moment when each person in a room privately knows the silence is uncomfortable but assumes everyone else considers it normal. The result is the same. The first one to break the silence has lost the structural game. They have offered information, position, or commitment that the other party can now leverage. Think of it like a vacuum chamber. Open the door and air rushes in. It is not a choice, it is physics. The person across from you is not deciding to talk. Their nervous system is performing an emergency repair on a void you created by saying nothing. Charles Maurice de Talleyrand understood this. In 1814, France had just been defeated. Talleyrand, the foreign minister of a humiliated nation, sat down at the Congress of Vienna across a table dominated by Britain, Russia, Austria, and Prussia. the four powers preparing to dismember French territory. He spoke almost nothing for the opening sessions. The other powers, accustomed to negotiating with each other, began arguing among themselves to fill the void his silence had created. Within weeks, Talleyrand had positioned France as the swing arbiter between rival coalitions and walked away with French borders almost intact. He understood that in a room full of people who need to talk, the man who will not is the only one whose price keeps rising. This is the exact same mechanism operating in your life right now. You have felt it. Think about the last meeting you sat through where someone asked a question and let it sit, and you filled the silence with 3 pieces of information they never directly requested. Think about the negotiation in which you stated your position first and watched the person across from you adjust theirs accordingly. Every time, the structural advantage went to the one who waited. You must stop confusing the discomfort of silence with the failure of silence. The discomfort is the silence working. This is the answer to the second question that opened this video. You ask why talking betrays you. The answer is the vacuum chamber. Your nervous system is wired to seek resolution. Your social conditioning is wired to fill space. The two together make you a fountain of disclosure for anyone with the patience to sit and watch the water rise. But the vacuum is only the entry mechanism. What happens inside the other person while the silence holds is a far more dangerous pressure system. And it is the reason the people closest to you have spent years training you to talk. You now understand the external mechanism. The vacuum demands to be filled, but the vacuum is only the entry point. There is a second mechanism that operates inside the listener while the silence holds, and it is the reason you have spent your entire adult life feeding people information they never had to ask for. It has nothing to do with your generosity. It has everything to do with a psychological pressure most people never see, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The pressure differential. The silence does not feel the same on both sides of the table. When you hold silence intentionally, your nervous system stays calm because you chose it. When silence is imposed on someone who fears it, their amygdala interprets it as social exclusion and floods their system with the same chemicals it would release in response to physical threat. They do not experience an awkward pause, they experience an emergency. Sidney Girard, working in the 1960s on what he called the disclosure reciprocity effect, demonstrated something the entire field of social psychology has been confirming ever since. Humans treat conversational disclosure like a social debt. When the other party will not disclose, the talker compensates by over-disclosing, hoping to provoke reciprocity. The trap is exactly this. The silent listener never owes you anything back. The debt only flows in one direction. Cesar Borgia understood this in 1502. In late December of that year, 4 mercenary captains who had betrayed him and conspired with rival families were invited to the town of Senegalia to reconcile. When they arrived, Borgia greeted them warmly, embraced them, and led them inside as though the betrayal had been forgotten. He said almost nothing about the conspiracy. The captains, expecting accusation, began filling the silence themselves, explaining, justifying, professing loyalty, naming co-conspirators they assumed he already knew. By the time he spoke, he had every name, every motive, every weakness mapped. Then he had them strangled. The captains were not killed by his words, they were killed by their own. Borgia simply provided the silence into which they confessed. This is the exact same mechanism operating in your life right now. Look at your work environment right now. Look at the meeting last week where someone asked a question and let it sit, and you filled the silence with 3 pieces of information they never directly requested. Look at the relationship in which you find yourself explaining the same decision in increasingly elaborate ways while the other person says almost nothing. That is not a conversation, it is an extraction operation, and you are the deposit. Does this sound calculating? Good. The world is built on extraction. The polite people will tell you this is cynical. The polite people are getting eaten alive by the calculating ones every day, and they refuse to look at the bite marks. You must stop assuming silence is shared. The pressure of an unfilled pause is asymmetric. Whoever fears it most pays the highest price. And in almost every conversation you walk into, the one who fears it most is you, because you were trained to fear it before you could read. The vacuum extracts the disclosure. The pressure differential decides who pays for the extraction. But there is a third mechanism, the one teased in the opening, the one professional interrogators use to break men who were trained to resist torture. And once you understand it, you are going to have to look at the people closest to you in a way you have not been willing to look at them before. Here is the tactical application. The next time someone asks you a question, any question, you do not respond immediately. You hold the silence for 7 full seconds. You count internally. You watch their face. They will start to speak. They will rephrase the question. They will offer answers on your behalf. They will reveal what they actually wanted to know, what they were afraid you might say, what they were hoping you would confirm. In 7 seconds, you will learn more about their position than they learned about yours in the previous hour. And when you finally speak, you will speak from the position of the only person in the room who saw the whole hand. The interrogator's silence. This is the mechanism nobody warns you about, because most people who deploy it do not even know they are deploying it. When silence is paired with warmth, with apparent patience, with the absence of accusation, it becomes the most efficient extraction tool ever developed in the history of psychological pressure. Subjects trained to resist torture surrender to it within hours. Hans Scharf understood this. During the Second World War, Scharf was the chief Luftwaffe interrogator stationed at Dulag Luft, the German interrogation center for captured Allied airmen. His subjects were American and British fighter pilots, men trained extensively to resist coercion, to give only name, rank, and serial number, to expect torture. Scharf used none of it. He took the prisoners on long walks. He spoke warmly, asked nothing of substance, and let silences open between them like a slow tide. The pilots, expecting hostility, found themselves filling those silences with anecdotes, technical details, unit information they would have died before revealing under a beating. The Allies later studied his methods and concluded Scharf was the most effective interrogator of the war on either side. He never raised his voice. He simply waited. The silence did the interrogation. The warmth removed the resistance. What modern interrogation researchers later named the Scharf method, and what police interview literature now calls the silent witness paradigm, is the codification of one observation. When a subject expects pressure and instead receives patient warmth, the nervous system reads the combination as safety, and safety opens the gates that pressure could never break. Now look at the relationship in your life where you cannot stop explaining yourself. Look at the family member who asks one mild question and then sits perfectly still, watching while you spiral through 3 justifications you never planned to offer. Look at the partner who says they just want to understand and then says nothing else for the next 20 minutes while you build them a complete confession of every doubt you have ever had. Look at the close friend whose silences seem so attentive that you find yourself volunteering pieces of yourself you swore you would never share again. This is not love. It is not curiosity. It is not even malice in most cases. Most of the people doing this to you learned it the same way Scharf's prisoners learned to talk. Pattern recognition under pressure. They discovered somewhere along the way that if they sat still long enough, you would deliver everything they needed to know without them ever having to ask. You trained them to use your silence against you by paying them in disclosure every time the air went quiet. They will tell you that you are being paranoid. They will tell you that this is just how conversations work. Let them. Their denial is part of the architecture. The one thing the interrogator cannot tolerate is a subject who recognizes the technique. The morality police will call this distrustful. The morality police are losing every conversation they enter. You must understand what is being taken from you. If you continue feeding the silence in the relationships that demand it from you, you will not just lose information, you will lose the architecture of who you are. Every confession you offer becomes a piece of you that someone else now owns. The tax compounds. We have exposed the vacuum. We have measured the pressure differential. We have identified the interrogator's silence operating in your closest relationships. Now we arrive at the final mechanism, the state that, once installed, makes you immune to every silence ever turned against you. The state that turns the room you walk into upside down before you have spoken a single word. The sovereign listener. When you stop filling, you do not become absent, you become the gravitational center. Every conversation in the room tilts toward the unfilled space, and every person in your orbit moves to balance it. The Stoic philosophers, particularly Marcus Aurelius writing in the Meditations, gave this state a name. They called the underlying discipline Apatheia. It is not the absence of feeling, it is not the absence of speech, it is the absolute mastery of when, why, and to whom you spend each. Apatheia in conversation means that your speech becomes expensive. You no longer pay it out as the price of social comfort. You release it only when releasing it serves the position you have already chosen. The sovereign listener is not a person who never speaks. The sovereign listener is a person whose speech costs the listener something to receive, because the silence beneath it has trained the room to listen for signal, not noise. You must understand what you are becoming. When you operate from this state, every room you enter reorganizes around you. People will talk more in your presence than they planned to talk all day. They will tell you things they had not told their closest friends. Some will misread your silence as agreement and commit themselves to positions they cannot retract. Some will misread it as judgment and rush to defend choices you were never going to question. Most will simply find themselves more comfortable confessing to you than to anyone they have ever met. This is rare because most people refuse to pay the price, the third concept named. They would rather fill silence and remain knowable than hold silence and become unreadable. They would rather be liked for their explanations than respected for their restraint. They would rather be understood than be sovereign. They will call you cold. They will call you arrogant. They will call you a withholder. Let them. Their misunderstanding is the price of admission to a conversational operating system that 99 out of 100 people will never install. This is the architecture the opening promised. 4 mechanisms, 1 state, the vacuum that opens the gate, the pressure differential that decides who pays, the interrogator's silence that breaks the unbreakable, and the sovereign listener who occupies the silent side of every conversation as a permanent address rather than a momentary tactic. The architecture is yours. You walked into this convinced that every word you spoke was building a bridge. You now see that every word you spoke was paying a tax to a system that was extracting you in real time. You see the vacuum. You see the pressure differential. You see the interrogator's silence operating in the rooms you spend the most hours in. The veil cannot be pulled back over your eyes. You cannot unrecognize the technique once you have named it. The question is the binary choice. Are you going to keep filling the silence? Are you going to keep handing your information, your position, your interior life to people who never asked for it, because the discomfort of an unfilled pause is too much for you to hold? Or are you going to install the protocol, accept the cost, and become the person whose silence reorganizes every room they enter? Most people will close this video and go right back to filling. They prefer the familiar exhaustion of being known. They will explain themselves tomorrow. They will justify next week. They will confess to the same patient listener they confessed to yesterday, and they will call it conversation. The chains are off. The architecture has been named. The technique has been mapped. You can never again sit through a silence without knowing exactly what is happening on both sides of it. The only question remaining is what you will do the next time the silence opens, and the silence will open. It always does. Most people will scroll to the next video. They will absorb the theory and return to the noise. They will keep paying the disclosure tax, keep feeding the interrogator's silence in the rooms that have learned to extract them, keep hoping for the witness who will recognize what they have given without ever having to be told. But somewhere in your life is another mind that should see this. The one who has been exhausted by the same translations, the one who has been paying the same invisible tax to rooms that were never listening, the one who has been called cold or arrogant or detached for reasons they could not fully name. Send this to them. Some debts are owed to minds like yours. The frequency has been sent from MindCrypt. Those who can receive it will find the next transmission. Those who cannot will return to the noise. The question is simply which one you are.